Ethan tore the amber fluid bag free, and for a heartbeat, Daniel Hayes's pulse flatlined. Then the monitor beeped again, weak but alive. Charlotte gasped in relief. But as the door shook under the mercenaries' ram, a new question thundered louder than any heartbeat. How would they escape? Chicago. In late autumn always carried a strange heaviness, a mixture of steel-gray skies, sharp winds off Lake Michigan, and the restless hum of a city that never quite settled down. The parking structure outside Hayes Biotech headquarters reflected that mood perfectly. Concrete pillars stretched like tired soldiers into the cloudy sky, and the air smelled faintly of ozone after a recent drizzle. Fluorescent lights flickered to life against the darkening afternoon, their buzzing chorus competing with the muffled rush of traffic below. Ethan Miller was not a man who belonged among towers of glass and wealth. At 38, he had the look of someone weathered by too many storms, both literal and personal. His brown hair, slightly curled at the edges, had begun to show strands of gray near the temples, and his eyes, once bright blue, were dulled by fatigue. Years of working nights as a janitor and security substitute had carved faint lines into his face. He wore the dark blue uniform of the building's night staff, though his shirt was a little faded and his boots scuffed at the edges. Despite his tired frame, there was a quiet steadiness about him, like a man used to enduring without complaint. Beside him trotted Shadow, a German shepherd unlike any other. Shadow was 6 years old, his fur a rich blend of black and iron gray that seemed to shimmer even under the sterile lights of the parking structure. A white cloth was tied gently across his eyes like a blindfold, not decoration, but necessity. 2 years earlier, an accident during a fire rescue had left Shadow blind. Where others might have faded into uselessness, Shadow had sharpened other senses. His hearing was almost supernatural, his nose sharp enough to detect subtle shifts in the air. Despite his blindness, he walked confidently beside Ethan, ears twitching, tail swaying with calm assurance. To those who saw them, Ethan and Shadow looked like two survivors bound together by unspoken loyalty. The late shift was usually quiet. Ethan would sweep, empty trash bins, make rounds in the hallways where executives had long since gone home. But today he lingered near the parking lot, waiting for the CEO herself to appear. He didn't usually cross paths with the higher-ups. They lived in another world. But something about today pressed at his chest like a warning drumbeat he couldn't ignore. Charlotte Hayes arrived in a swirl of precision and authority. At 42, she carried herself with the rigid grace of someone who had grown accustomed to commanding attention the instant she entered a room. Her hair, a sleek curtain of golden blonde, was pulled into a twist at the back of her head, and her tailored black suit fit her tall, slender frame, as if it had been crafted directly onto her skin. A string of pearls at her throat softened nothing. Her pale gray eyes remained cold, calculating. Those who worked with her often described her as brilliant but unyielding, a woman who saw emotions as inefficiencies. Her life had not always been so austere. Years earlier, before the company consumed her, she had been warm, even playful, a protective older sister to her only brother. But his diagnosis with a degenerative neurological disease had changed her. Now her entire empire, every dollar and every risk, funneled into finding a cure. It made her formidable, but also brittle, like glass stretched too thin. As Charlotte strode toward her sleek black sedan, waiting at the far corner, two men in dark security suits flanked her, both tall, broad, and trained to blend in while radiating intimidation. They moved like shadows cut from the building itself. The driver opened the rear door for her, bowing slightly. Charlotte didn't smile. She never did. She had a private jet waiting to take her to an undisclosed meeting, one that promised a breakthrough, a chance to see results that might save her brother's life. Every minute mattered. Ethan felt the moment arrive before it happened. Shadow stopped suddenly, ears snapping upright, his nose twitching wildly. The dog let out a low, uneasy whine, then pawed at the concrete with unusual urgency. Ethan followed his lead, crouched and noticed it, a metallic glint tucked into the undercarriage of Charlotte's sedan. His pulse kicked into overdrive. He had seen enough in his years of odd security jobs to recognize something that didn't belong. The object wasn't a piece of machinery. It was too deliberate, too foreign. "Ma'am, don't get in the car!" The words tore from Ethan's throat like a desperate siren. His voice, usually low and steady, cracked with raw fear and echoed through the garage. The sound made Charlotte freeze mid-step, her manicured hand hovering over the chrome handle. For a moment, the entire world seemed to collapse into silence. The hum of the city outside, the squeak of tires on damp pavement, even the shallow breath of shadow at Ethan's side. All of it vanished, leaving only the echo of that command. Charlotte's guards moved instantly, one interposing himself between her and Ethan, the other lunging toward the janitor. Ethan didn't resist when his arms were twisted behind his back, though pain shot up his shoulder. His eyes never left the car. "What the hell is this?" Charlotte demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The first guard slammed Ethan against the concrete wall, the impact rattling his bones. "Night crew," he growled. "Name's Ethan Miller." Probably insane, Ethan struggled against the iron grip. "Please, you can't let her near that car. It isn't safe." His words were hoarse, frantic, but his eyes carried no madness, only desperation. Charlotte narrowed her gaze. She had dealt with sabotage before, rivals attempting to rattle her empire. But something in Ethan's tone unsettled her. He was not shouting for attention or leverage. It was the shout of a man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Still, fury flared at the interruption. She was 12 minutes behind schedule. That was unacceptable. The guards prepared to drag Ethan away when a deeper voice intervened. Jake Reynolds stepped into the scene. At 45, Jake carried the unmistakable bearing of a former soldier. Broad-shouldered and tall, with close-cropped brown hair streaked with gray, his face was carved from years of discipline and conflict. A faded scar traced his left jawline, a reminder of his time as a Marine in Iraq. His dark suit fit snugly, concealing the muscle beneath, but nothing could hide the intensity in his steady brown eyes. Jake had served as chief of security for Hayes Biotech for nearly a decade. Colleagues knew him as unshakable, loyal, and blunt. He respected Charlotte, but was not blind to her flaws. Now, as he studied Ethan, this exhausted janitor with pleading eyes and a blind dog whining at his feet, Jake felt a flicker of something he rarely experienced on the job: doubt. "Hold up," Jake said, raising a hand. His voice was even, but carried authority that made the guards pause. "Let's check the vehicle first." Charlotte turned sharply toward him. "Jake, this is absurd. The man is delirious." "Maybe," Jake admitted. His gaze remained locked on Ethan. "But we don't get paid to gamble on maybes." The words hung heavy in the damp air. Charlotte's jaw clenched, fury battling with reason. Finally, she gestured curtly. "Fine. Lock down the car. Get the bomb squad if you must, but I want him restrained until I know why my entire evening is being shredded by a janitor." Ethan sagged against the wall, half in relief, half in exhaustion. His wrists throbbed from the cuffs, but Shadow pressed his warm body against Ethan's legs, grounding him. The dog's white blindfold shifted slightly as he lifted his nose, sniffing the air, restless as if sensing the storm that had only just begun. Charlotte straightened her jacket and exhaled slowly. She had a plane to catch, a meeting to salvage, and a brother waiting. But now she was trapped in the ripple of a stranger's desperate warning. The wheels of her carefully built plan had just been thrown into chaos, and she hated chaos more than anything. Jake glanced one last time at Ethan's face. The man's eyes, haunted, sincere, told a story that didn't fit the profile of madness. Something deeper was at play. And for the first time in years, Jake Reynolds felt the sharp edge of unease cut across his professional certainty. The conference room on the 50th floor was a glass cage in the sky, its walls stretching from carpet to ceiling, revealing a restless Chicago skyline where storm clouds still sulked from the earlier rain. The long obsidian table reflected sterile light, and the air hummed with an oppressive silence broken only by the faint whir of the HVAC. Ethan Miller sat stiffly on one side, wrists red from the cuffs that had only recently been removed. His janitor's uniform rumpled from the scuffle. Beside him lay Shadow, curled obediently, ears twitching at every sound, the white blindfold tied around his head like the bandage of a wounded knight. Charlotte Hayes stood near the window, her profile hard against the skyline. She looked like a woman carved from marble, tall and exact in her tailored suit, pearl earrings glinting coldly. Yet her fingers, folded tightly around a crystal glass of water, betrayed tension. Across the room, Jake Reynolds leaned against the door with the stillness of a sentinel. He had dismissed the lower guards, but his eyes never strayed far from Ethan. "Mr. Miller," Charlotte began, her voice calm yet clipped. "You've cost me an hour of my life and a meeting that cannot be rescheduled." You will explain why Ethan inhaled, steadying himself. He had expected anger, but the weight of her stare pressed like a vice. "It isn't about me," he said finally. His voice, though roughened by exhaustion, carried quiet conviction. "It's about my daughter." Charlotte's expression didn't shift, though her gray eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. "Your daughter?" "Sophia," Ethan said, his throat tightening on her name. "She's 9. Brown hair like her mother's, wide smile. When she was healthy. Now she can barely hold a pencil. She has something called neural collapse syndrome. I doubt you've heard of it." Charlotte cut him off, her voice lower but sharper. "I have." For the first time, Ethan looked directly at her, startled. He saw not just the mask of a CEO, but the shadow of something personal. He pressed on, words tumbling faster. "It's the same thing your brother has, isn't it? Same tremors, same decay. I know because I found proof he reached into his satchel, taken from him earlier but returned for the interrogation, and laid a manila envelope on the polished table. His hands trembled as he slid out sheets of paper, jagged at the edges, taped together with almost desperate care. Charlotte moved closer, curiosity overcoming disdain. She picked up the pages, scanning the uneven lines of data. The printouts bore the unmistakable look of documents rescued from a shredder. Misaligned, patched with scotch tape, some sections barely legible. Ethan's voice accompanied her, reading like a weary guide. "I found these in a disposal bin on sub-level 3, spent nights piecing them together. Most were research logs, patient responses, chemical trials. But, look here." He tapped a chart, his nail scraping paper. "This is supposed to be recovery data. The percentages are identical across 3 different subjects. Identical. That doesn't happen in real science." Charlotte's jaw tightened. She had seen plenty of fabricated reports in the corporate world, numbers bent to please investors. But this, falsified data tied to her brother's supposed cure, cut differently. Ethan's voice dropped to a rasp. "They're lying to you!" "The trial isn't working. It's killing them." The silence afterward was thick, broken only by Shadow lifting his head, nostrils flaring. The German shepherd whined and stood, padding toward the end of the table where a small silver case had been left. One of Charlotte's assistants had delivered it earlier, a sealed sample from the latest phase of the project. The case had not been opened, but Shadow sniffed at it urgently, then pawed the floor, barking once, sharp and anxious. Ethan stiffened. "He smells something." Charlotte frowned. "It's sealed. Impossible." Yet her eyes betrayed unease. Shadow had been trained once as a rescue dog before his blindness. His instincts were rarely wrong. Ethan knelt by the case, inhaling faintly near the latch. The scent was acrid, chemical, metallic in a way that made his head swim. "Not impossible," he muttered. "Dangerous?" Charlotte set the shredded papers down, her grip on them tighter than she realized. For the first time, her certainty cracked. Across the room, Jake Reynolds had remained silent, absorbing every word, his soldier's mind sorting truth from manipulation. He trusted his instincts as much as his training, and they told him Ethan was not weaving lies. When Charlotte turned to the window again, Jake slipped his phone from his pocket, shielded from her view. He opened a secure file reserved for high-level security reviews. His fingers moved with calculated precision, digging into the company's financial records. He had access no janitor could dream of, but he also knew the risks. If Charlotte caught him snooping without approval, his career was finished. Still, he had to know. Scrolling, he found what he feared, repeated payments routed to a consultancy under the name Helios Labs. The sums were vast, buried under medical equipment budgets and coded transfers. Jake's lips tightened. He had seen Helios Labs before, in military reports where companies with no real address funneled funds to contractors who specialized in one thing, covering tracks. The trail pointed to Dr. Adrian Finch. Finch was the lead researcher on Charlotte's Miracle Project, a man in his early 50s with thick salt and pepper hair, a warm smile that photographed well, and an unnerving gift for persuasion. To the press, he was a genius, a savior working to end incurable diseases. But Jake had met him once, months ago, and the handshake still lingered in memory, clammy, eyes too quick to glance away. Finch struck him as a man who thrived on secrets. Jake locked the phone screen and straightened before Charlotte turned back. His doubts had calcified into something heavier: suspicion. "Mr. Miller?" Charlotte said, her voice quieter now, though still taut. "Do you have proof beyond shredded scraps and a blind dog's nose?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I have my daughter, and I'll have her medical records if you'll look at them. That's proof enough for me." For the first time that evening, Charlotte didn't reply with scorn. She studied Ethan, his weary eyes, the raw edges of his desperation, and something inside her shifted. She had seen that look before, in the mirror when her brother first collapsed. Shadow barked again, louder this time, snapping everyone's attention back to the silver case. Jake moved forward swiftly. "Ma'am, with respect, we should have this analyzed independently." Right now, Charlotte hesitated, then nodded once, sharp. "Do it!" Quietly, Jake gave Ethan a final look, one soldier to another survivor. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they had stepped into something far deeper than a false alarm in a parking lot. And Dr. Finch's name now hovered like a storm cloud, waiting to break. The rain had cleared by midnight, leaving Chicago wrapped in damp silence. The city lights shimmered off puddles like broken glass scattered along the streets below, 1,000 reflections of a world where power and fear interwove. On the 50th floor of Langford Tower, the atmosphere in the conference room was equally fractured. Charlotte Hayes stood at the head of the table, her posture as rigid as the steel beams holding up the skyscraper. She was 41, tall, with ash blonde hair pulled into a severe twist, and a reputation for never yielding an inch. Yet her hands, gripping the edge of the table, betrayed a tremor she tried to mask. Ethan Miller sat opposite, his janitor's uniform still damp from the earlier chaos. At 38, his rugged face bore lines etched by exhaustion more than age, his hazel eyes carrying a fire of desperation. He reached down and stroked Shadow, the blind German shepherd resting by his boots, the white bandana tied across the dog's eyes fluttering faintly in the room's recycled air. Shadow was alert, ears pricked, a living reminder that instinct often saw what sight could not. Jake Reynolds, the security chief, remained near the door. He was in his early 40s, built like a man forged from discipline, his broad shoulders squared beneath his dark suit. His square jaw and cropped brown hair gave him a soldier's bearing, but his gaze held something deeper, a weariness that no amount of rank or medals could erase. Charlotte broke the silence first. "Mr. Miller, you should be in police custody. By all rights, you caused a citywide panic, and yet," she paused, her gray eyes narrowing, "you know things you have no right to know." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "Because it isn't coincidence. Neural collapse syndrome isn't common, Ms. Hayes. Less than 2,000 diagnosed worldwide. My daughter Sophia and your brother share the same fate. And what you call a treatment?" His jaw tightened, words almost breaking. "It could kill him." Charlotte's lips pressed into a hard line. For years she had relied on data, reports, and promises from scientists like Dr. Finch. But this janitor, this nobody, had thrown her certainty into chaos. "You're suggesting my funding, my entire initiative, is a fraud?" Ethan held her gaze. "Not suggesting. Telling you. I saw the buried numbers, mortality rates scrubbed from the final reports. I saw the chemical logs. The so-called cure doesn't stabilize neurons. It accelerates their collapse. If your brother stays in that program, they'll bury him under the guise of science." Shadow let out a soft growl as if to underscore his master's words. Jake shifted, memories flooding unbidden. Iraq, 2007. The desert night was broken by gunfire, his unit pinned down in a crumbling village. He had been squad leader then, responsible for every life under his command. When the ambush came, chaos swallowed them. One man, Corporal Harris, was cut off. Jake had been ordered to pull back, and he obeyed. But Harris never made it out. For years, Jake carried that ghost in his chest, the look of betrayal in a comrade's eyes when left behind. Now, in the sterile glow of Langford Tower, he saw a similar fire in Ethan's expression, the desperate resolve of a man refusing to let another person die. Jake straightened, decision hardening within him. He would not make the same mistake twice. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice even but firm, "with respect, Miller has a point. The disease hitting his daughter and your brother isn't coincidence. At the very least, the overlap demands we listen before handing him over to authorities." Charlotte turned, eyes flashing. "You're suggesting we defy protocol?" Jake's gaze didn't waver. "I'm suggesting we don't lose another life because we trusted the wrong people." For a long moment, only the hum of the air system filled the silence. Then Charlotte exhaled slowly, shoulders stiff. She had always prided herself on command, on bending situations to her will. Yet here she stood, confronted not by board members or politicians, but two men society would call ordinary, a janitor and a soldier turned guard, each with nothing to gain but the truth. She studied Ethan, his uniform smudged with grime, the calluses on his hands, the sleepless shadows under his eyes. He looked like a man beaten down by life, but still standing. Then she looked at Jake, the soldier who never flinched from her authority, yet now challenged her with quiet conviction. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt something unusual stirring in her chest. Doubt. Ethan broke the silence. "If you want proof, give me access to the raw logs. Not Finch's polished reports, the backups, the lab notes, the ones stored in the secondary server. I'll show you the data they don't want you to see." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "And if you're lying, then you'll never see me again," Ethan replied without hesitation. "But if I'm right, then your brother's life depends on hearing me out." Shadow barked once, a sharp echo in the vast room, as if punctuating the plea. Charlotte turned away, facing the night-lit skyline. The city spread out like a board of endless possibilities, each light a choice, a risk. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, almost weary. "You will not be turned over to the police, for now. But understand this, Mr. Miller. Your life is tied to your claims. If you waste my time, I'll make sure you regret it." Ethan nodded, relief and dread tangling in equal measure. Jake's shoulders eased slightly. He had made his stand, and for once, Charlotte had listened. The ghost of Corporal Harris flickered at the edge of his memory, but tonight, Jake swore silently, no one would be left behind. Charlotte's gaze flicked between the two men. It unsettled her that the people she was beginning to trust were not the decorated scientists or polished executives she had built her empire on, but a janitor clutching shredded papers and a security chief haunted by old scars. Yet, perhaps truth lay not in titles, but in loyalty born of loss. The fragile alliance was forged, not from trust, not yet, but from necessity, from the thin hope that survival required them to stand together against shadows darker than any storm outside. The night air outside North Valley was sharp and heavy with the scent of damp pine. Clouds smothered the moon, leaving the forest in a deep shroud of black. Only the faint red glow from Charlotte Hayes's wristwatch lit the narrow path as she, Ethan Miller, Jake Reynolds, and the blind German shepherd Shadow crept along the perimeter fence of the sprawling underground research compound. Every footstep was deliberate, muffled against moss and mud, the silence of hunters approaching their prey. Charlotte, dressed in a dark tactical jacket over a fitted charcoal blouse, had shed the polished corporate veneer. Her blonde hair was tied back beneath a black hood, her pale face sharp with tension. Tonight, she was not the CEO, but a sister on the edge of desperation. Ethan, his janitor's uniform exchanged for a faded brown jacket and work boots, crouched close beside her, his rugged face streaked with dirt. His hazel eyes flicked constantly toward the facility as if scanning for invisible threats. Jake, steady and towering behind them, moved with the fluid caution of a soldier who had learned to count his breaths in battle. His black fatigues blended with the night, but the scars of memory, scars no one could see, etched themselves in every measured step. Shadow padded softly at Ethan's side, the white bandana over his blind eyes fluttering in the breeze. Despite the darkness that had claimed his sight years ago, the dog's ears twitched at every sound, his nose flaring as he caught chemical tangs drifting from the compound. He moved with uncanny certainty, his paws finding the quietest ground, as though the lack of vision had sharpened his soul to the task of guiding them. The group paused at a rusting drainage culvert, half hidden by weeds. Ethan crouched and brushed debris aside, revealing a narrow pipe descending into darkness. "This is it," he whispered. "Maintenance conduit, leads directly under the east wing. They won't expect us here." Jake leaned over, his jaw tightening as he studied the confined entrance. His broad shoulders would barely fit. "That's a coffin chute," he muttered, but he crouched nonetheless, lifting the grate with brute strength. "You go first, Miller. If Shadow can guide, we follow." The descent was suffocating. The pipe stank of rust and stale chemicals, every scrape of boot echoing into infinity. Charlotte swallowed her fear and forced herself forward, fingers scraping the slime-slick walls. Shadow crawled ahead, his claws clicking softly against the metal. He stopped, sniffed, and wagged his tail once, then moved on. It was as though the dog knew the path better than any blueprint could reveal. When they emerged, they found themselves in a cavernous maintenance chamber beneath the main lab. The air reeked of antiseptic mixed with metallic tang, and fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Pipes ran along the ceiling like skeletal ribs dripping condensation. Charlotte exhaled shakily, brushing grime from her jacket. "We're in," she murmured. Ethan froze. His sharp eyes had caught movement above, a surveillance camera sweeping slowly across the room. He motioned for silence and ducked behind a stack of storage crates. Jake slipped close, his hand instinctively hovering near the pistol holstered at his side. Charlotte crouched with them, her pulse hammering. Through the grate above, voices carried, cold, clinical, and unmistakable. Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch, the head researcher, appeared through the glass wall of the adjoining lab. He was a tall, angular man in his 50s, silver hair slicked back, his once handsome face hardened by ambition. His immaculate white lab coat glowed under the sterile lights. Yet his eyes were sharp with calculation, every gesture precise, as though even his cruelty was engineered. Beside him stood two assistants in surgical scrubs, faceless beneath their masks, pushing a gurney toward the center of the lab. On the gurney lay a man tethered by wires and EV lines, Kellen Hayes, Charlotte's younger brother. His once strong frame looked ghostly pale, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the room, though its rhythm faltered like a candle guttering in wind. Charlotte pressed a trembling hand against the glass. For a moment, she forgot stealth. That was her brother. Finch's voice cut the silence. "Initiate liquidation protocol. The trial phase is over. Transfer the remaining samples and prep the subject for disposal." The assistants moved without hesitation. One carried a small IV bag filled with dark amber fluid, almost syrupy, and clipped it onto Kellen's line. The fluid crept into his veins like poison. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Ethan seized her arm. "That bag? It's wrong. It's not medication." He surged forward before she could stop him. With a desperate shove, he forced open the service hatch into the lab. Alarms wailed instantly, red lights flashing across the chamber. Finch spun, fury distorting his composed mask. "Who dares?" But Ethan had already reached the gurney. With one sharp tug, he ripped the amber IV from Kellen's arm. The monitors shrieked, then steadied, the erratic peak softening into a fragile but rhythmic beat. Kellen stirred faintly, his lips parting as though he had been pulled back from the edge of darkness. Charlotte dropped to her knees at his side, clutching his cold hand. "I've got you, Kell." "Hold on," Shadow barked, low and insistent. His nose pressed against the dropped IV bag. The dog pawed at it, growling as though recognizing the toxin for what it was. Finch's face blanched. He stepped back toward the exit, but Jake was there in an instant, his weapon drawn and steady. "Not this time," Jake said, voice like iron. "On your knees." For the first time, Finch's composure cracked. The great architect of false cures and buried data faltered, his hands trembling as he raised them. But danger was far from over. From outside, the lab came the unmistakable staccato of boots on concrete and the metallic click of rifles being chambered. A squad of armed mercenaries, Finch's hired men, flooded the corridors. Their leader, a stocky man named Travis Cole, barked orders with a southern drawl. Travis was in his late 30s, his buzz-cut hair and scarred jaw marking him as ex-military turned gun for hire. He was pragmatic, ruthless, and loyal only to his paycheck. Jake's jaw tightened as the sounds drew closer. He knew their type, soldiers stripped of honor, rebuilt as weapons for hire. They were here to erase every trace of Finch's crimes, witnesses included. Charlotte's eyes widened in panic. "We can't fight them all." Ethan's gaze snapped to Jake. "What do we do?" Jake inhaled slowly. His mind flicked back to Iraq, to the night he left Harris behind. He had run once. He would not run again. "You get Kellen out," he said, his tone steady though his eyes burned. "I'll hold them." Charlotte shook her head violently. "No, Jake." But he cut her off with a rare, small smile. "Ma'am, I spent a lifetime regretting the one I couldn't save. Tonight, I make it right." Ethan's throat tightened, but he nodded. He understood. Some debts could only be repaid with sacrifice. Shadow pressed against Jake's leg, whining low, sensing the weight of the choice. Jake crouched, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Take care of them, boy. Guide them home." The mercenaries' shouts grew louder, the clang of their boots echoing like thunder. Jake squared his shoulders, positioned himself by the doorway, and raised his weapon. For a fleeting second, the ghosts of Iraq faded. In their place stood a soldier reborn, ready to shield those who still had something left to fight for. Charlotte, Ethan, and Shadow wheeled Kellen's gurney toward the maintenance exit as alarms blared. Behind them, the crack of gunfire erupted. Jake Reynolds made his stand. The gunfire had not yet faded when the first dark SUVs rolled through the forest road leading to North Valley. Tires crunched over gravel, headlights cutting sharp beams through the trees, and the words FBI blazed in reflective paint across their jackets as armed agents spilled out. The air smelled of cordite and pine sap, of violence interrupted by the weight of law. Inside the underground facility, Charlotte Hayes clutched her brother Kellen's frail hand as Ethan Miller and Shadow pushed the gurney toward the exit. Red alarms strobed across the hallways, and the thunder of mercenaries colliding with Jake's last stand echoed behind them. Then, suddenly, new voices shouted commands, firm, disciplined, unmistakably federal. The mercenaries froze under the sweep of tactical flashlights, rifles trained on them with merciless precision. At the head of the agents strode Special Agent Miriam Carter. In her late 30s, Carter was tall, with a lean frame built from years of field work. Her auburn hair was pulled into a practical bun, her freckled face stern but not unkind. A scar above her left eyebrow testified to a brush with danger in a raid years earlier. She had a reputation inside the Bureau for steel-clad professionalism, tempered by a quiet empathy that surfaced when least expected. She moved quickly through the chaos, barking orders, her eyes narrowing when she spotted Finch struggling under the grip of two agents. Dr. Finch's once pristine lab coat was torn, his silver hair disheveled, his face pale with rage and fear. "You don't understand," he shouted. "I was saving lives." This was progress, but his words fell flat as evidence cases were hauled out, as Shadow growled low at his presence, as monitors displayed data that screamed of falsification. Carter barely looked at him. "Read him his rights. He'll have years to explain." Charlotte pressed closer to her brother, whispering softly. Kellen's eyes fluttered open for a moment, the faintest flicker of recognition crossing his pallid features. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes, but she steadied her voice. "You're safe now. I promise." Ethan stood near her, his hand resting on Shadow's head. The dog leaned against him, tail low but wagging faintly, sensing relief ripple through the air. Ethan's mind wandered to Sophia, his daughter, her laughter before the illness, the way she used to color the edges of paper with joy. Tonight, for the first time in years, hope stirred, and then Jake appeared. Two agents supported him, his arms slung over their shoulders. His dark fatigues were scorched at the edges, his temples streaked with blood, but his posture remained unbowed. His eyes, sharp even through pain, locked on Charlotte and Ethan. "You got him out?" Jake rasped, a faint smile touching his lips. Charlotte crossed to him in 2 strides. "You nearly died," she hissed, but the tremor in her voice betrayed something deeper. Jake gave a soft, humorless chuckle. "That's the job." His gaze drifted briefly upward, as if to an invisible comrade watching. But this time, nobody got left behind. Carter, the FBI agent, took in the tableau, the frail patient, the resolute CEO, the battered soldier, the exhausted janitor with his blind dog, and her expression softened. "We'll handle the cleanup," she said firmly. "Get your people out. There's no need for you to stay in this grave any longer." Weeks passed. Winter loosened its grip, giving way to the gentler breath of spring. In a quiet suburb outside Chicago, life found new rhythm. Charlotte Hayes kept her word. With Ethan at her side, she announced the launch of the Hayes Miller Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding real, transparent neurological research. She used her influence and wealth, and Ethan lent his raw honesty, his testimony of a father who nearly lost everything. Together, they drew scientists of integrity, families of patients, and donors tired of empty promises. Sophia Miller became the symbol of their mission. Under new treatments and careful supervision, her strength began to return. The little girl, with her chestnut hair and bright smile, took her first unassisted steps in months across the carpet of their modest living room. She laughed, a sound Ethan hadn't heard in too long, and Shadow barked with joy, circling her protectively, though he could not see. Sophia would kneel often to hug the dog, pressing her face against his thick fur, whispering secrets only a child could imagine sharing with a blind guardian. Jake, meanwhile, recovered slowly. Bullet grazes and cracked ribs kept him in bed for weeks, but he bore the pain with the stoicism of a man used to worse. When Charlotte offered to reinstate him as head of security, he shook his head. "I'm done guarding corporations," he said quietly. "I want a life that's mine, not one spent behind iron doors." Instead, he moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of town, a place with a porch that faced the sunrise. Shadow spent many afternoons there with him, dozing in the grass, while Jake repaired fishing rods or tended the modest garden he was learning to keep. Charlotte often visited, her brother Kellen beside her in a wheelchair, still weak but improving. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to laugh without bitterness, to sit barefoot on the grass as Sophia played, to sip coffee without her phone buzzing with crises. She was still the woman of steel, but now she carried a softer edge, a rediscovered humanity, forged not by wealth or power, but by loyalty earned in the darkest hour. One afternoon, beneath a great oak tree in Ethan's yard, Sophia unveiled a new drawing. She had sketched 5 figures holding hands under the branches: her father, Ethan, her aunt figure, Charlotte, her uncle, Kellen, Jake with his broad shoulders, and Shadow, bandana tied proudly across his eyes. Above them, a radiant, sun-spread golden light, and around them, birds in crayon colors filled the sky. She smiled up at the adults, holding the picture like a treasure. "This is us," she said. "My family." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes, and even Jake, hardened soldier, blinked rapidly as though dust had stung him. Charlotte reached down, smoothing Sophia's hair. "Yes," she whispered, "our family." The circle was complete. Final lesson. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not flashes of lightning or voices from the heavens, but quiet moments when courage meets compassion. A blind dog who could still guide, a father who refused to give up, a soldier who chose redemption, and a sister who found her humanity again. These were not accidents. They were signs of God's hand at work, weaving broken lives into a tapestry of hope. In our daily lives, we may not face secret laboratories or dramatic rescues, but we do face despair, loneliness, and choices that test our faith. The story reminds us that God often sends help in unexpected forms, through ordinary people willing to love, to sacrifice, and to believe. When we choose truth over comfort and faith over fear, we allow His miracles to shine. If you believe God still works through the people around us, type Amen in the comments. Share this story so that others may find strength in their darkest nights. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, love, and redemption. May the Lord bless you and keep you today and always.